goal of this video is to create a tree in Blender and then import that tree into Unity. So to start out, I'm going to rename the cube to be tree. That'll be the base of the tree. I'm going to hide the camera in light, go to edit mode, hit M to merge at the center to create a single vertex. I'm then going to use E to start extruding that vertex into a series of vertices. And then I'm actually going to go back to object mode, add in a cube, move it over to the side. I'm actually going to use this cube as a reference for how tall I want the tree to be. So I'm going to scale it up in the Z axis, and that'll be the height. So I'll actually change it to 8, and that'll be 8 meters or 24 feet. I can actually change it to 15 meters is probably tall enough. Then I'm going to shift up the location and use that as a reference point. I'll call it height. Go back to the tree object, keep extruding up. This will be the trunk of the tree. And then I can actually start to create some of the branches. So this won't be as tall as 15 feet or 5 meters, but that's okay. I'm just using E to extrude in different directions. I can actually hide the height cube to make this a bit easier to see. I could actually use a reference image for this if I wanted to, but I'm just going to not use that. So I'm working on creating the roots there, or at least the start of the roots at the bottom of the tree trunk. And again, this is just an outline. We're going to add some modifiers to make this look more like a tree. So in object mode, I'm going to add a skin modifier, select smooth shading. That actually looks a little too bulky, so what I'm going to do is go back into edit mode, go into wireframe, select everything, hit Control A to decrease or increase the width of all the vertices. In this case, I decreased it. And then I'm just going to add a subdivision modifier as well. I'm going to use Control R to add some additional vertices, and then Control A to increase the width of the trunk of the tree. Then what I'm going to do now is start to build out more of the branches and more of the roots to get this to look the way that I want it to. And I can highlight a single vertex or a series of vertices and use Control A to increase or decrease what is effectively the branch length. I'm not going to spend too long doing this. I actually already have a pre-made tree that I'll show here in a second, but just as an example of how this would look like very quickly, I'm setting up these branches and then I'll set up the roots. And using Control R to add additional vertices. And then I just want the roots to go in a bunch of different directions, and I want the roots to get smaller and smaller as they extrude further out from the base of the tree. So again, I'm not going to spend too much more time on this. Just getting this to look somewhat like a realistic tree as an example. And then again, I spent like maybe 20 minutes on a tree before creating this video that I'll load in to show an example of what a completed one looks like. I mean, technically this could be counted as a completed one. And then yeah, I think that's about good for this. I'm going to switch over to this tree that I made earlier using the same exact process. And there's the height cube from earlier. Probably don't need that anymore. So now what I'm going to do is go back into object mode. I still have those modifiers on. I'm going to go and open up shader editor, add a new material. This will be for the bark, so I'll call it bark material. And then what I'm going to do first is delete the principal BSDF and add a diffuse. And then I'm going to add an image texture. Now there's no image selected, so I'm going to open an image that I actually just took myself. I took an image of some bark. But there's plenty of images online. I'm going to set up a mapping and a texture coordinate. And then I actually need to go in and apply these two modifiers. So I need to do that in object mode. So I'll apply the skin and the subdivision. And then I can actually go back to edit mode, select everything, hit U, Smart UV project, and OK. And now I will have this tree UV unwrapped. There's my image of bark that I took off of a tree. And then I'm actually going to scale this up to 50, and that will effectively tile this bark texture that I took. I did edit the bark texture, or the bark image, slightly to make it more seamless. And then I actually want to add a color ramp to this, and then I'm going to change the right color to be more of a bark. You can leave it how it was off of the image, but I want it to be a bit more brown. And that's looking pretty good. So now what I need to do is add some leaves to this. So I'm going to add a cube, use S to decrease the size of it because the leaves need to be a bit smaller. I'm going to hide the tree for now. And then I'm going to actually drag in an image of a leaf that I took. I'm going to scale that to be about the size of the cube. In edit mode for the cube, I'm going to use Control R and then press 5 to add loop cuts both vertically and horizontally. And then again in wireframe mode, you can see that I need to scale down in the Z axis to make it very thin, like a leaf would be. So I'm actually going to use all these vertices to outline this this leaf that I have to start to actually get the shape of it. So I'm just using this as a reference image. So again, I'm going to skip forward a little bit in this process. As you can see, I start to get that outline going, and that's pretty much it. I'm going to rename that to image, and you can see I have a pretty good leaf. I actually need to fix like a 1 point on there, but I'm actually going to select the 4 vertices on the bottom, and then I'm going to use Shift plus S and cursor to selected. So now the cursor has been moved to there. I'm going to move into object mode, select the object, set origin to 3D cursor. So that moves the origin of the leaf to the stem of the leaf, which is where I want it to be, and that'll become relevant once I start adding these leaves to the tree. I'm going to reset the cursor to the world origin. And now I need to actually add a texture to this leaf. So I'm going to rename it to leaf. I'm going to add a material, leaf material 01, and then I'm actually going to texture paint the leaf image that I actually showed earlier. I'm going to texture paint that onto it. So again, hit U, Smart UV Project. So now I have that leaf. I don't want it on the bark texture, so I'm going to go over to Texture Paint. I used N to open up this menu and then selected Tool from the side menu. Under the material, I'm going to change it to an image texture, create a new image texture, call it leaf, hit OK. I'm going to add a texture, and then I'm going to open up that leaf image that I showed earlier. Now if I try to just paint this on, it's actually not what I want at all, so I need to change from tiled to stencil, drag the leaf image onto the leaf object, and then paint it. And I'll actually have to do that for both sides, so I have a second image that I took of the back of the leaf, but I won't show that for the sake of time. All right, next step is, now that I have the texture paint done, you'll actually notice in the leaf material you can see that image texture on the node. So what I'm going to do next is, again, just showing that, I can move over to that leaf image, and you'll want to save that if you're planning on moving this into Unity. So I already saved it. I saved it as leaf 005 for now. And then I'm actually going to delete the principal BSDF, add a diffuse, and then I'm actually going to add a color ramp in the same way that I did for the bark material, and then choose a shade of green to make the leaf look more how I want it to. So now I have the tree done and I have the leaf done. Now I need to add all of these leaves to the tree branches. So I'm going to select the tree. I don't need the UV editor anymore. So I'm going to go into edit mode, and then I'm going to go to the vertex groups, add a new group. I'll call it branches. And then if I actually go into wireframe mode, I can select as many vertices as I want and then assign those vertices to a vertex group. So again, I already set one up. You can see it on the right hand side called leaves. I'm setting up this one called branches as an example of how to do it. So I've selected all the branches, I click assign, and then when I click select, it remembers all the vertices that I picked. So for leaves, I picked all of those areas as where I want the leaves to go when I start to set up a particle system for this. So I'm actually going to edit it slightly. I'm going to select a few more branches just to get some more leaves in there. I think that looks pretty good. So I'm going to reassign. And now when I select the leaves, you can see all the vertices. So I'm going to go to particle properties. In object mode, I'm going to add a particle system. I'm going to select hair. I'm going to change the number down to around 200. Now, I don't want the particles to be everywhere, so under vertex groups density, I'm going to select that leaves group that I just made. And now you can notice all the hair is coming out of the tree branches. I'm going to go to render as path, change it to object, and then the instance object, I will use the eyedropper to select the leaf. So now if you zoom in, you can see the leaves are spawning just on those branches. But they're very, very small. So what I want to do is make a couple edits here. So in render, I'm going to update the scale or increase the scale and also the scale randomness. So I'll have different size leaves. And then I'm actually going to increase it from 200 to 2000. The higher the number, the more memory this is going to use. So I'm actually going to bump it up to 4,000, and I can change around the seed to change where they're spawning at. But I'm going to select Advanced, Enable Rotation, change the orientation axis to Object Z. So you notice they're all facing directly up now. And then I'm actually going to update Randomize, or increase the Randomize, to where now the leaves are pointing in a variety of different directions, which is what I want. And I think that looks pretty good. That's mostly it for creating the tree in Blender. So what I can do to try to get this into Unity is to go to the modifiers, select Convert. That'll convert all 4,000 leaves to individual objects. I don't want them as 4,000 different objects, so I'm actually going to use Control J in object mode after applying the modifier. So I'll select all 4,000 leaves. I hit Control J. It may take a minute, but it will merge them all into one object. So now I have a leaves object and a tree object. I'm actually going to delete most everything else. I'm going to select both of these objects, go to File, Export, Export as an FBX, and then select Selected Objects on the options, and then Export. And then going into Unity, I just have a ground or a floor. I'm going to drag in that FBX file that I just created. And I can see I have the tree with the leaves. I drag it into the scene, and it doesn't have any materials on it, but that is the tree that I just created. So I'm going to move it up slightly so you can see some of the roots. And now I need to add the materials. So I'm going to create a material, call it bark material, and then I'm actually going to drag in that bark seamless image that I was using in Blender. Again, this is just a picture of some bark that I took. I'm going to drag it onto the albedo of the material, change the tiling to 50 by 50 in the same way that we changed the scale in Blender. And then I'm actually going to update the color again to get it to kind of match what I had in Blender. And that looks pretty good. So now I need to create the leaf material. So I'm actually going to drag in that saved image from Blender as a result of the texture painting. I'm going to drag that onto the albedo of the leaf material. And then I can drag that material onto the leaves, and it'll update all 4,000 of them. And then I can also update the color to be more of a dark green. And now I think that pretty well matches what I had created in Blender. You can even zoom in and see some of the detail from the texture painting on the leaves and everything. Again, using 4,000 leaves takes up a lot of memory, so it might be better to use something like a few hundred or even 1,000. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's how you get trees into Unity. The only other thing you can add is a component for a collider. So I'm just going to add a capsule collider, and then I'm going to hit Edit Collider. And now basically if anything moves into the tree trunk, it will stop, or it should stop. And that's it.